in the upcoming budget, what I would like to see is an additional expenditure on infrastructure. So this will come primarily through the capital expenditure of the government. And this should be in addition to what normally happens out here. So in a sense, what I'm saying is that in case we are spending something like 3.4 lakh crores on capital expenditure in 1920, there would be a normal increase of say around 10%, which happens every year. So I would like it to go beyond this particular amount of say 3.7, 3.8 lakh crores, and maybe as a kind of a ballpark number, we could say around 0.5% of GDP, which will be the additional fiscal deficit which can be carried by the government of India, is something which could be directed towards infrastructure spending. So in effect, this would be something like 1.1 lakh crores, which will provide a direct boost to investment demand and provide the backward linkages with all the related industries, thus creating jobs, creating more income. Of course, this would take some time to work out, but this is something which can be done, and I think it should be done. No, while it is true that there are a number of fiscal constraints which are there, I think we need to get out of this mindset of saying that we need to have a fiscal deficit number of say 3% or 3.3 or 3.4%. We should remember that when we are talking of fiscal expansion, more in the line of what Keynes, the economist, had spoken of, it was a case of saying that the government should spend when the private sector does not spend. Now, what we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years is that the private sector investment is down because of low demand conditions and because of excess capacity which is there in most industries. In such a situation, the only way we can revive the economy is for government to take the lead and you spend additional money on capital expenditure, that is, for infrastructure projects. So some kind of a compromise has to be made in ideology, which I think any kind of deviation, say for 1 or 2 years, would be welcome since it will bring the desired effect.
The fiscal pressures are intensified, limiting the government's ability to stimulate growth, and continuing financial sector wars are already delaying a pickup. If that wasn't enough, the ongoing global slowdown is also a material constraint. Now, there's little the budget can do to address the latter two, but on the fiscal side, anything can in fact be on the table. If the goal is to kickstart growth, then breaching the fiscal deficit temporarily to spur consumption is one option. To avoid such moves from being unsustainable as they have been in the past, the government should use any additional fiscal space to push capex or spend to augment incomes in rural areas where the propensity to spend and consume tends to be generally higher. This can act as a consumption kicker. Stepping up of Narega and rural construction works, for instance, is one way to go about it. Improving the effectiveness of ongoing schemes and other spends such as the PM Kisan scheme, etc., is another option that the government can choose to go forward with. Problem, however, is that this will aid a slower kick up to growth. So it can push the 5 trillion economy goal a bit further, but in the short term, this can certainly ensure a fairly faster growth lift.
We're hoping it will be infrastructure because that is something that is important for ease of doing business and ease of living, and it's really something which benefits a large section of the country. So we're hoping that different infrastructure sectors are going to get a push and that it's going to be in line with the boost that the NIP has promised. In terms of logistics, time taken to get to markets, whether it's farm produce or factory produce, all of that, time taken to get to the ports, all of these are important. We need to sort out the bottlenecks, and really also it helps to break down the barriers which lead to higher pricing as well. So this is something that we're hoping that the budget is going to remain focused on infrastructure the way that has been promised through the NIP. And ultimately, this is something that will boost the core sectors and then flow back into higher improved sentiment and consumer demand. And thereby sentiment will improve, job creation should be there, and overall consumption will get a boost as well. So it's better to start with boosting infrastructure and then getting to a situation where consumption gets a lift rather than focusing on consumption in the first place.